I'm Christopher O'Connor, the Vice President of Brewery Operations for Prost Brewing, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast for All About Beer. My guest is Grant Wood, the Brewmaster for Bureau Brewing, and he is here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. First, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at All About Beer. To support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but first, this message.
The Brewer to Brewer podcast is proudly sponsored by First Tea. They have hundreds of teas and botanicals to create unique beer flavor, and ginger stands out as one of the greats. Try ginger in warming winter stouts and in ales for ginger beer flavor. Ready to spice things up? Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to learn more about using ginger and other botanicals from First Tea.
Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney from Launchpad Brewing in Aurora, Colorado. And the main reason for our relationship with Malteurop, besides the consistency of their product, is working with Dustin Kraft, our local Malteurop craft sales manager. Dustin has some extensive brewing experience from previous jobs and is excited about the products that they offer and are developing. We have two separate brew houses at Launchpad, a 5-barrel pilot system and a 20-barrel brew house, which allows us to test some of the experimental malt products occasionally, which really keeps the creativity flowing in the brew house. In addition, we have had great experiences with their customer success team. Try our GABF gold medal winning beer, silver medal worthy, an American Belgian style ale made with 100% Malteurop malt. Contact Malteurop today and visit malteuropmaltingco.com.
Today's episode is sponsored by Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use digital design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Okay, let's get into it. A bit about my guest today. Originally from Irving, Texas, Grant has been in the brewing industry since 1985. He began his career at Pearl Brewing Company in San Antonio after receiving his BS in Food Science and Technology from Texas A&M. A 1987 graduate of the long course at Siebel Institute of Technology from 1989 to 1995, he was the assistant brewmaster at Lone Star Brewing Company. In 1995, he departed for Boston and was the brewer and production manager at Boston Beer Company. He was involved in many roles, including product development of Samuel Adams beers, Angry Orchard ciders, and Twisted Tea. In 2012, he left Sam Adams after 16 years and co-founded Revolver Brewing in Granbury, Texas. As brewmaster, he created a variety of award-winning beers, including Blood and Honey. After selling the successful craft brewery to Miller Coors in 2019, he came out of retirement to create the beers for Tom Holland's new NA beer brand, Bureau. He received his diploma brewery from the Institute of Distilling and Brewing in the UK, been a beer judge at GABF, World Beer Cup, and the BIIA in the UK. Grant, welcome to the pod.
Good to be here. Thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk about your story and the history of beer and brewing. I think your perspective on where we've been and where we're going as an industry is invaluable. With that said, how did you know that beer was going to be your life's pursuit?
That's such a hilarious, it's really a funny question because a lot of my peers and friends in the brewing industry, fell in love with beer often from home brewing, when they were teenagers or something, or maybe they saw their dad do it and they wanted to become brewers because they just, fell in love with the beer and then went from there. I, on the other hand, got out of A&M. Got married, needed a job, went to work for a pecani sauce manufacturer in San Antonio, Texas, which turned out to be a massive mistake. So I quit, started doing some odd jobs in the San Antonio area and was, painting houses and taking care of adult handicapped folks and all that sort of stuff. And one day my wife, Susan, and I'm going to give Susan a lot of credit, throughout this whole podcast, I think. She finally, virtually kicked me in the butt and said, get a real job, one that involves your degree. And I was like, okay. So sent out some resumes in San Antonio. And I got one bite, which was from Pearl Brewing Company. and went in for an interview, and they were hiring for the quality assurance lab, quality control lab. And so I was very fortunate. I got hired. A little credit to Texas A&M too, because the plant manager liked Aggies, and so yeah, I went to work in the lab, and from there I discovered honestly how cool beer and brewing could be. Because before that, being a typical kind of Texas teenager and guy that went to Texas A&M, beer for me was something pale and fizzy. And keep in mind, again, this is the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And, beer to me was sort of this yellow, fizzy, unsweetened soda that had some alcohol in it that helped to wash down pizza and hot dogs. It wasn't very complicated. And, in many ways, beer wasn't very complicated back then either. So, discovering how it was made, bringing malt and hops, agricultural products together in a beautiful, fascinating brewery with copper and all kinds of fun stuff. Kind of fell in love with it and fell in love with the process, and pretty quickly asked to get out of the lab and get into production. And so was in the lab for a couple of years. Like I said, went in 1985, I guess, and then the folks at Pearl were kind enough to send me to brewing school in Chicago. So I went to the 1987. At the time, I think they just called it the long course. It was a 3-month course from basically Labor Day to right before Thanksgiving. And again, it kind of blows my mind now to think back. It's been almost 4 decades, and so we show up to the class, the old Siebel on Lincoln Avenue in Chicago, and I think we might have had just over 25 students, maybe. 4 of them were from Stroh, a few from Coors, a fair amount from various places all over the world. A couple guys from Korea, a guy from Taiwan, a guy from New Zealand, and then a couple of other names that are kind of interesting, which is a guy named Dan Carey, who went on to form New Glarus. He was in my 87 class, and another guy
That's
named Jamie
amazing.
Emerson, who went on to create Full Sail. And so, kind of again at the very beginning, well, not the very, very beginning, but in the very early days of craft and meeting those two in my Siebel class. Oh, and Mike Hancock out of Canada. He had his place up in Toronto. So anyway, some real early adopters, as they say, in the craft industry. And then got my little diploma from Siebel and went back to work, third shift at Pearl. Just managing union guys that had fought in World War II in Korea. They were a crusty old bunch of German dudes for the most part, and learned a lot. Learned how not to manage, and but got kind of tired of not getting a raise and tired of working third shift. And I went to an MBAA meeting in San Antonio and bumped into a guy named Dick Beisel, who was he was assistant brewmaster at the time at Lone Star, across town from us, and asked him if he had any positions open. And he said, no, but send me a resume. And then I got a call the next day that said, send me a resume. And so sent him a resume. Long story short, got hired over there, which was lovely. Got a nice raise, moved to the other brewery across town. And they were sort of fascinating. They're both about the same size, a little over 1 million barrels apiece. It's kind of mind blowing now again to think about that from other breweries, but 2 regional breweries in the same town, about 1 million barrels, both Pearl and Lone Star. And so moved across town, went to Lone Star. Was there for about 6 years, and just to work both sides of the brewery, the hot and cold side. kind of alternated back and forth with a guy named Pat Coons. The brewmaster was a guy named Ken Lee for most of my time there, who just a great guy. He taught me about managing, which was also great. And then unfortunately, and this is probably where I'm going to say the worst words about somebody. There's a guy named Alan Bond. I don't know if any of you guys, go back and Google Alan Bond. He bought Heilemann in a leveraged buyout in the 80s. That was kind of a buzzword of the 80s. And he bought out Heilemann, and Lone Star was a part of the Heilemann group, and pretty quickly drove it into bankruptcy. And Alan Bond went to jail for quite a while for fraud. Anyway, he kind of, I blame him for sort of wrecking the mid-tier of the brewing industry in the United States. Enough about him. But anyway, he forced me to decide what I was going to do with the rest of my life back in that day. Ken was great. He came to me and he said, we've got two ways this is going to go. It's going to go bankrupt, or we're going to get sold to Stroh, and then they're probably going to shut the brewery. So you might ought to think about what you're going to do. And so in my typical fashion, I sent out a couple of resumes. I sent one to Samuel Adams, who was looking for people at the time. And then I sent another one to Anchor out in California. And because I really didn't want to go to AB, and I just wanted to stay small if I could. Craft again was kind of growing up. And so I was very fortunate. Got a call from David Grinnell, who was at the time director of brewing at SAM, had a great conversation with him, and they offered me a job. And we ended up moving out of San Antonio to Boston. And big change for the Texans and the Southerners. But I have to, again, give credit to my wife, Susan, who agreed to do that thing, get out of our comfort zone. And went to work for Sam Adams. And I tell people that I learned more about making beer and brewing in the first 2 years at the Boston Beer Company than I did in my first 10 years in the brewing industry. Again, a lot of credit to David Grinnell, kind of my mentor there. And, David, I like to call his management style chaos management. He's kind of like, I'm going to push you into the pool, and hopefully you know how to swim. If you call for help, I will acknowledge you, and I will help you how I can, but you're going to have to call for help. It was great. It was a lot. It was just like a rocket for my learning curve there. And just a fantastic high energy, as Jim Cook likes to say, ready, fire, aim was our buzzword there for a long, long time. And stayed there for 16 years. And just a great experience. Did a lot of different things. But then, as does happen sometimes, you get to a place where you think, I can't get any farther. Do I need to take another move? And again, at the time, I was very fortunate in that a guy was looking to build a brewery in Granbury, Texas. And I came across one of the Brewers Association emails that they would send out, periodically. And I saw Granbury. I thought that sounds familiar. And looking at a map, it was close to where I grew up in Irving, and had a good conversation with the guy that was bringing this thing together, a guy named Rhett Kiesler, and made me an offer I couldn't refuse, essentially. And had an opportunity to move back to Texas, kind of back closer to home. And we started Revolver, which started drone on. I just pull the chain, Chris, and I just keep going.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
And so anyway, my idea at the time, and again, this was, 2011 going into 2012, I was 49, I guess. And I was thinking, I'll move back to Granbury, sleepy little town. We'll build a little brewery. And I'll make a little beer, and I'll sell a little beer, and we'll drink a little beer, and we'll slide easily into a 10-year, 15-year gentle retirement program, right? Which is not what happened. Revolver kind of blew up. We made a beer called Blood and Honey, which took North Texas by storm, and made my management and production life way more busy than I thought it would be. Had to hire brewers. We went from one shift to two shifts, and then had to, buy tanks and went to a third shift because we didn't have an automatic brew house. Kept it simple. It's all manual, two vessels. Put in a second brew house, and you'd go back and forth. You'd mash in. 4 hours later, you'd mash in this other one. The whole thing's kind of going back and forth. And we would do 30 barrel brews in a 24-hour period, all manual.
Damn.
And
that's moving on a manual system.
dude, yeah. I mean, it was like, again, it was sort of this back and forth thing. No, it was every 3 hours we'd mash in. That's right. If we were going flat out, it was about every three. And so anyway, 30 barrels at a time, man, we built Revolver. And then I was at the Great American Beer Festival in 2015, and I got an email from my former boss, a guy named Jim Cook. And whenever Jim emails, you always pay attention because he just doesn't do that.
Seems fair.
Yeah, kind of like what's up? And so he said, "Are you going to be in Denver?" And I said, "Yep, I'm here." He goes, "If you got a minute, let's talk." And I'm like, "Yes, sir. I will. Where do you want me to be?" And so basically his message to me when we chatted was, this is 2015 again. He says, have you thought about selling your brewery? And I was like, no, I'm busy building this brewery and making beer. I have no time to think about that. And he goes,
Right.
well, the big boys are out hunting, ABI, Miller Coors, Constellation. Maybe you've noticed that they're buying up little breweries. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I will take that back to Rhett and Ronnie, and we'll chat about it. And but I did say, hey Jim, are you making me an offer?
Yeah, right.
and
I mean,
and he goes, we're not going to be on visual here, but Jim twists his hair a lot when he's thinking and he's talking. He has this little habit. He's like twisting his hair, and he goes, yeah, Grant, yeah, you're too expensive for me. And that was like, what? I was like, I think my eyes kind of bugged out of my head. Anyway,
sure.
so I go back and talk to Rhett, and he's like, all right, well, we'll think about that. And then we have a booth. We're at the GABF, and the head of mergers and acquisitions for Miller Coors stops by and says, hey, you guys want to talk? And
At
so
GABF.
at GABF. Yeah.
Wow.
So they flew down to Granbury, and we chatted for about a year, and finally made us again an offer that we couldn't refuse. And yeah, we
How
sold.
hard was that? How hard was that choice? Like sitting back, like thinking about it now, like it was a brand that you built from the ground up, brand new facility, whole new team,
Yeah.
like rocket ship attached to the brand.
Yeah.
Like how difficult of a decision was it for you to say, we'll hand this off to the big kids and
Yeah.
find something else to do?
Yeah. To be honest, it didn't take me that long to make that decision.
Sure.
I think for me, I'm not a young guy anymore, I guess. And though I feel that way.
Oh, come on.
And I thought about it, and Rhett said, how would you feel about selling your baby? This is blood and honey, this is your baby. And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, this is probably a one-off opportunity.
Sure.
This isn't going to come around again. No one's going to come beating our door down, and this isn't going to be a bidding war. And there had been some signs. We can talk about industry signs, but there have been signs that for craft in Texas. I live in Texas, and this was all in Texas, and so there are some headwinds in Texas to craft. Just simply geographic, frankly. And we were doing self-distribution. We were self-distributing 20,000 barrels at the time in package and cases and stuff like that. We had our own fleet of trucks and drivers. And one could argue that we were either the fourth or fifth largest distributor in and of ourselves, right? And
Wow.
we had some differing attitudes about distribution and that sort of thing. And so I think we could see Rhett and me and Ronnie could sort of see headwinds in our future. And you know, at the end of the day, the go, you know, though some may disagree with me, beer is not a religion, it's a business. And this is a purely business decision, I think.
Sure.
And so I was willing to make that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. I
And
mean, a
so
lot of
yeah,
your career.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we sold, um, closed it out in 20 at the end of 19. Um, got our close out of our equity in March of 2020. And then, as we know, March of 2020, everything went south, you know, with COVID. So
Yeah.
timing was perfect. I worked for about another year to kind of bring in the new management team and then retired in November of 2020 and did some consulting, kind of hung around. And then Bureau came calling. And then we can talk about more of that at the end of this, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of going back to the history of your career. I mean, you've had a lot of opportunities to be in production management, and I know that for me personally, the managers that shaped my career were invaluable to me, and the things that I learned from them were basically how I treat people and as a professional now. And
Yeah.
so, in your long history in the brewing industry, who inspired you the most? What did you take from them, and why?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back. I'll start back at Pearl. There was a guy named Ed Robbie. He had been at Pearl for many, many years in a variety of roles. He was the brewmaster that basically hired, or he was not brewmaster. He was quality assurance guy. He was in the lab. But he had held brewing positions, and I think as he got closer to retirement, he ended up in the lab. But he kind of inspired my interest in brewing. He gave me the opportunity. They had this little tiny 5-gallon pilot brewery in the lab there that they would run trial brews on recipe, ingredients and change of malts and things like that, just to make sure, just a gut check. And so he let me play around on that, little tiny 5-gallon system. I met a guy who kind of came through at the time, a guy named Peter Burrell, who he knew people who he had in the management at PAPS at the time. I guess he was the son of one of the people on the board there. He came down and spent like an internship type of thing for about 4 months. And he was working on building a brewery of his own, which he ended up doing out in Petaluma, California, called Dempsey's. And so he kind of inspired me as well about what, it's not just malt and corn grits or corn syrup and, you know, uh, cluster hops, which is basically what it was at the time. Um, so I give Ed a lot of credit. And then when I made the change across town, I mentioned it before. Ken Lee was the brewmaster, brewing manager, and Pat and I were his assistants. And I really liked Ken a lot. He was smart guy, good manager. He was very clear about his expectations from us. He said, if it's, definitely if it's an emergency, you call me. If it's not super emergency, but I need to know about it before I go and talk to the plant manager, we're going to meet every morning at 7:30 and, you're going to kind of prime me on, the last 24 hours, what's going on. And so very steady guy, didn't scream, didn't yell. I only saw him in my years there. I only saw him raise his voice one time, and just that sort of uh, calm, um, clear on his expectations, treated everybody well and with respect. And so I feel like I learned a lot from him on just treating anybody as a person and understanding, being firm and being fair, but you don't have to be a jerk. If someone does something wrong, you correct them on it. If they continue to do it, you document these things and you take corrective action. And again, when things started looking like they were going to go south at Lone Star, and he came to me and he said, this is probably how it's going to go down. You might want to consider your next steps. And this is your manager telling you this, right? And I
Right.
thought that was great, and I wanted to emulate that. Um, and then moving on to Sam Adams, I mean, Jim Cook, guy, he is all he's cracked up to be. When he's in the room, he is the smartest guy in the room. And he only hires really smart people. And just watching him think about things and the way he, uh, even tasting and considering about the beers and these sort of things, even outside all the business decisions that he ever made. Just a smart dude and down to earth. He's got a wicked sense of humor, and always, again, treated people fairly, treated people with respect from the ground up, from the hourlies all the way up into his VPs, um, and then Grinnell, I sort of mentioned as chaos manager. I have a very distinct memory. Very soon after I joined Sam Adams, and I was like, I walked into his office one day, and he was, I don't want to say he was mad, but he had some certain look on his face. He had an expectation about why didn't you do this or something like that.
Yeah.
And I made the mistake. I guess I made the mistake of saying, Ken, my previous boss, I knew exactly what he wanted, and he would come in and I would deliver this thing, and he goes, "I'm not Ken Lee." And you have to be ready for everything. And just
Sure.
you don't know what's going to come at you. I'm going to keep you off balance. We're going to find your weaknesses in a sense, and we're going to strengthen those things. And so I'm going to blow up your expectations about your manager right now. And and so, I was like, okay, well, that's okay. I guess that's how it's going to be. And
Right.
and then, but you again, you learn from those things, and it is a lesson, and it might not be the way that I typically like to manage people, but I learned a lot, and he was a great mentor. And in particular about how we designed beers at Boston Beer Company and the philosophy behind uh, how those things went together. And the growth out of the original Boston Lager recipe, which sort of percolated its way out into every other recipe, frankly, I think is informed by that foundation. And so just that philosophy of uh, beer and product construction and
Mhm.
flow of information, uh, learning how to audit a brewery, to go into when I worked for Sam Adams, we started at 5 different breweries. If you want 6, if you want to include Boston, and all of them were different. All the waters were different. All the brewing structures were very different, or slightly different. And so we had to go in with these ingredients, our yeast, our malts, our hops, and make that brewery make Boston Lager, and do the very best we can at flavor matching, uh, and meeting specs and all those sort of things. Massive, massive education, and um, still use a lot of those lessons to this day.
Yeah. I mean, tech transfer is a very interesting beast. There's a lot of gears to turn to make sure time tells itself correctly. But
Yeah, yeah. To the even one of the biggest lessons there for me was just time and management of time and temperature. Because if you're making Boston Lager at Cincinnati, and you're making Boston Lager, now they're making it in Lehigh, right? They own that brewery. So
Mhm.
Cincinnati's 200 barrels. Lehigh's 1,000 barrels, or just shy of 1,000. And so just the time of transfer and the transfer of heat through mass, right? Um, all those things affect conversion and um, how you control that. And then when you get into fermentation, how fast can you cool that if you need to cool it? All of those things are very different on a 200 barrel scale versus a 1,000 barrel scale. And so that's
Absolutely.
a huge challenge.
No, totally. I mean, even the physics of how yeast move in those taller tanks can be wildly impactful on how things ferment.
Yeah, it was actually a rule for many, many years. I know we're talking about Sam Adams a lot, but they tried their best to keep the loggers in horizontal tanks. Just that's when they were at Pittsburgh, they were horizontals. When they were at Lehigh, they're horizontals. At Cincinnati, they had a mix, but we tried to keep it in the horizontals. All those sort of things we took into account when we were looking at breweries to brew in and qualifying them. Do they have that type of fermentation capability? Yeah.
Sure. No, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Well, we're about the halfway mark, so we're going to take a short break for this message and then come right back for more of this conversation with Grant Wood.
Holiday times are the right time for a nice gingerbread stout. First Tea has ginger, the defining flavor of this zesty holiday classic. Combine ginger with cinnamon, vanilla, and other flavors to create your distinctive holiday beer. Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more.
Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney from Launchpad Brewing in Aurora, Colorado. And the main reason for our relationship with Malteurop, besides the consistency of their product, is working with Dustin Kraft, our local Malteurop craft sales manager. Dustin has some extensive brewing experience from previous jobs and is excited about the products that they offer and are developing. We have 2 separate brew houses at Launchpad, a 5-barrel pilot system and a 20-barrel brew house, which allows us to test some of the experimental malt products occasionally, which really keeps the creativity flowing in the brew house. In addition, we have had great experiences with their customer success team. Try our GABF gold medal winning beer, silver medal worthy, an American Belgian style ale made with 100% Malteurop malt. Contact Malteurop today and visit malteuropmaltingco.com.
This episode is also sponsored by Stomp Stickers, one of our favorite partners when it comes to printed brewery products. Stomp Stickers is a reliable resource for printed items such as beer labels and boxes, keg collars, coasters, and more. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Welcome back. So, nice.
I'm pouring a beer for those of you who can't see, or
So-
beero for those of you who can't see,
That's right.
because it's
And
the
it's
middle of
NA,
the
so
day
it's
and I
fine.
can drink one if I want to.
That's true. That's very, very true. I should go grab one. It is tasty. That's funny as hell. Uh, so we had this conversation a little about your history. I really want to start to focus on the future now. So with what you've seen in the industry and with your newest project with Bureau, where do you see the industry going? What trends have you seen kind of come and go, and which ones lasted? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said earlier, I think it's a little shocking to me sometimes to wake up and realize that I've been in the industry for practically 40 years. And I've seen these waves, right? I've seen the sort of business cycle run a couple of times. Um, and I think there are some things, I think the things that sort of are evergreen, if they last forever, is quality. There's a quality to some beers, and let's go beyond that. Cider, even seltzers and teas. There's a flavor thing that is consistent, and if it doesn't taste good, with some notable exceptions, that
Well, I won't make you name names.
no, thank you. That it has to have a certain character of quality to be successful. And so it's interesting. And I think we've talked about this before. There's an adage that says stories sell beer. And I believe that. I'm going to flip that on its head a little bit. One of the things I like to say is every beer has a story and has a creation story behind it, or there's a reason for it to be. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to just understand that there are cycles, right? I think a lot of people forget that things go in and out of fashion, go in and out of style. And
Yeah.
I
saw
think
Jinkos the other day.
what's that?
So I saw Jinkos the other day. So apparently
Yeah,
that's back in fashion. But no, you're very,
right,
very right.
right. And so I think that to to understand that as a sort of a foundational piece, which is your business is going to go through cycles. And to try to do your best to, as you say, try to find the trend, try to find a wave to ride, to carry your business through that cycle. And so, and with some, some breweries are good at it and are fortunate to find their niche. They got a good spot. Like say if you're a brew pub, you've got the perfect spot. You get good foot traffic. Maybe you get a strong lunch crowd that kind of sustains the main part of your business with a little bit of food and beer, and then you get your after work people that come in and have a beer before they go home, and you get a good weekend crowd. And so you've got a good sort of sustainable business because you were perhaps fortunate or smart and you found a good spot to do that in. And you were able also to kind of get the trends within the brewing industry because there are also trends, stylistic trends and things like that, where you may try to, to ride that wave. If you've gone from, kind of classic West Coast style IPAs with a bracing bitterness and the citrus and piney notes. And then maybe you took that and you continued down that path to hazy IPAs or even super like milkshakey IPAs and, things that are back sweetened and all that. And you can ride that wave for a little while and maybe you have this, you have a good creation engine, and you're not married to anything and you can ride that continuous wave of creation and maintain interest from your consumer. But the COVID kind of turned everything on its ear a little bit, and it messed with a lot of people's business plans. And then and so things that seem like a lock have gone away. Brew pubs where you meet or you relied on the business like that, they're going away. Mid-sized regional breweries that didn't get to, they didn't get to some sort of high enough level to sustain themselves. They may have gotten out of sync with their market, or maybe the big boys outpriced them, right? Because there was sort of a race to the bottom a few years ago on price. And so people started making choice, it seems like a craft beer. We're going to make a choice on price, and they'll move away from maybe their local because of that. But again, in the broader sense, I do think beer is here to stay. Beer's been here for centuries. I think it's going to continue to be here. I think that there's occasionally this desire to innovate, and try to get ever more precious, narrow blends of flavors to kind of differentiate themselves, which has a very limited interest time. Again, I think going back to the quality piece, if you make that your focus, keep your eye on the ball, be the dominant in your backyard. I think all those sort of business fundamentals are key. I still think that works. And there are going to be new beverages that come and go. We've seen the cider for a while. We saw Smirnoff Ice and its ilk, the teas, the seltzers. They just don't, I don't think they have kind of, again, going back to the story piece, there's not a lot of authenticity there. There's not a lot of meat to the story of that product. So, it doesn't have that sort of staying power. That's one of the cool things about distilleries, I think, those old line distilleries. They've got the story. They've been there for years. They tell a story about their products. And I still think that works well and helps the beer thing along. I think it's going to be
more of a personal connection to the products than anything else, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I do think that's key. One of the things I get this question also. What's the next thing? And what I'll do is I'll say, what are the middle schoolers drinking when their parents aren't home? What are they sneaking out of the fridge to drink, right? And that's what's next. Actually, that's not what's next. It's the opposite of that, because, maybe all these eighth graders, seventh and eighth graders right now, they're drinking seltzers or whatever happens to be in mom and dad's fridge. And they're not going to like that. They had that. They want something new. And maybe if you can catch them, they'll want something a little bit more traditional. Maybe will go back to beer. They want some flavor. They want some, for lack of a better word, gravitas in their beverage. Like some folks may have wanted maybe, about 10 years ago. And again,
Sure.
kind of goes back to the cycle.
Interesting perspective. I think there's a lot of talk in the industry currently around the reduction in overall alcohol sales. You kind of see it in the trends of macro and craft.
Yeah.
During COVID, wine and spirits kind of had a huge bump in sales, but I think that was mostly people stocking their liquor store internally up.
Yeah.
And I think that you started to see that come back down to earth. But the overall trends, just by liquid per person, are slightly down.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
that, do you think that that's a byproduct of COVID and people kind of isolating more and doing less social activities, or do you see that as a growing trend amongst younger people not
Yeah.
gravitating to alcohol in the same way?
No, I think it's the latter. I think there might be a little tiny COVID hangover, particularly for older folks who got used to not going out. They just stay home and they have a beverage at home. But I do think there's a broad trend in the American culture. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I do think that younger folks are drinking less alcohol. And you could make an argument that with the gradual legalization of cannabis, that they drink less and maybe they have some sort of cannabis more often.
Sure.
And so, I kind of pre-leading the bureau conversation. Again, I'm still working with Miller Coors and Revolver back in 2018. And I was sitting at CBC with a friend of mine, and we're kind of watching watching a presentation about, again, trends and looking into the future. And it was talking specifically about non-alcoholic beers.
Mhm.
And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at him and I'm looking at the screen. I'm like, we should be in there. This is 2018. And I said, I completely agree with this guy. I think we have a real opportunity here. And I was thinking of it really specifically regionally here in Texas. We don't have a true, what I would call a pub culture. Texas is huge. The cities are huge. They're spread out all over the place. You have to drive to get anywhere. And I think there's becoming more of an awareness of that. And having a fine tasting beer that happens to not have much alcohol in it that you can enjoy between beers or even all by itself on a school night. I thought that would be a great thing. Could not get any traction in the greater company. They didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, it was really interesting. They were, again, 2018. It was seltzer craze was on, and that's all
Sure.
they really wanted to think about. And yeah. And so it's like, oh, well, I guess I'll file that away. And maybe won't get to do that in my career. And
Well, now
so
you do.
what's that?
I said, now you do.
And now I do. Yeah. Yeah. That was kind of what brought me off the bench was this bureau opportunity. Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, after selling a brewery, you had the opportunity to retire. Like, it had to be a pretty enticing project
Yeah.
to start up again,
Yeah.
And I think that talking about Bureau, like, how did you go about like formulating these products? How did you choose the three that you started with? What did you want out of those brands, and why do you think that that's what was missing in the market?
Yeah. Well, the number one selling beer in the world is lager, right? It's pale, fizzy, depends on who you are, but can be slightly bitter. But it's kind of it's the beer of choice for the world pretty much. And so, I wanted to be in that space, and make something that fit into there. IPAs, well, in this case, a hazier IPA, but not super bitter. We could argue IPA semantics. We don't have enough in this podcast for that. But we made a beer that's called a hazy IPA. It has a lot of hop flavor. Not so much bitterness, but really I think fits well into that category to give you the hop character that you want. And then wheat, right? Wheat beers, you know, Blood and Honey was a wheat beer with some fruit in it, and that's kind of where that's a great third alternative and a great, I believe in the rule of three. Another thing I work for Samuel Adams. Don't just put one beer on the shelf, put three on the shelf. A little blocking and tackling on the shelf for that.
Yeah.
And I thought those were three really strong styles. Don't worry, we'll make more other styles. We've got kind of a West Coast IPA in development right now. We've got a couple others we got to do. Obviously, my very favorite style in the world is black lagers. So we're gonna make something dark. Might not be a lagerish kind of thing, but we're gonna make something dark as well. And so
We should
and
talk
then
about that one. I have an idea for you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, so the goal is not to, and what was also cool about this is we're not taking a big beer, we're not taking what we would consider as regular strength beer and making a new version of it, right? That has less alcohol. We're starting at that basis. That's the foundation. We're going to make non-alcoholic beers. We're going to formulate to that, and we're not having to match some other beer that already exists and try to make it as close as we can, because there's always going to be a loss in the comparison of those. I mean, it's kind of inevitable. And so wanted to build this from the ground up as a non-alcoholic set, and do it, kind of keep it simple.
Mhm.
That's another mantra, is like, if you can do it in the simplest way possible and do it well, then great. It doesn't take a overly complex or a sophisticated piece of machinery to try to get the best out of the flavors of the ingredients to make the beer. So,
Yeah.
and I was targeting full strength beers for flavor profiles. I talk a lot about Pilsner Urquell, about the lager. I thought that was a good starting point, a good North Star. There's so many different hazy IPAs out there. I don't think there's a really good North Star for that. There's a gazillion of them. But to
Right.
try to create the flavors, I like using New Zealand hops, love the flavors. And so I kind of focused on that for the flavors in the hazy. And then the wheat, obviously I love Blood and Honey, and love that flavor profile. So I wouldn't say it's not a simulation of that, but it's definitely inspired by that. And hats off to Blue Moon. I mean, they make a great product.
Yeah.
And so, and frankly, another one of my very favorite beers is Hogarten. I can't reproduce that. I mean, it's kind of a funky flavor, profile,
Sure.
bright, and, but those are all inspirations for those things. So yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, it really is kind of new territory for beverage production, especially in the non-alcoholic beer space. And there's
Yeah.
so much that's being developed currently to kind of aid in that production.
Yeah.
I guess for expectation setting for anybody who's trying to do this, like how long was R&D for you before you were like, yes, this is something that we should put out in the market. This is what Bureau should be.
Yeah. Well, Tom Holland joked a little bit about that when he was on TV last week about how we had a little trial and error. And yeah, no, and he's absolutely right. I had some ideas, particularly on the pills type, that just didn't work. Tried on the first two reps and it was like, no, this isn't gonna fly. But fortunately, the IPA came together pretty well. Hops do a lot of great things to add flavor and, frankly, cover up things that you don't necessarily want to taste,
Sure.
or kind of gaps in the beer. So that was in a sense the simplest. Not that it was super simple, but it kind of came together the easiest. Did three different brews and some variations on each of those three for different hop extracts and finishing kind of elements. Um, the wheat was a little tougher also to kind of find the right balance of beer and fruit in there.
Hmm.
And so I think it was 4 different trials for that.
Okay.
And again, the pills turned out to be the hardest to try to get, and it's the most naked. I mean, it's not like you can really hide things. And so
Yeah.
that was 5 different trials. Again, the first 2 kind of false starts. And
Hey, you got to know, right? You never know if you don't try it.
right. And so, but again, I think, a little credit to Mr. Holland, Tom is in there from the beginning. He has some very particular ideas about what he wanted and what he wanted it to taste like. And more power to him, man. I would try to teach him everything I know about, tasting and flavors and that sort of thing. And he's a willing student and learned a lot. And um, we came to some agreement on the way we wanted things to taste, and which is fantastic, and brings the buy-in really from the founder. He's not just I mean, he is a pretty face, don't get me wrong, he's a good-looking kid, but no, he's a smart guy, and really down to earth and super friendly, and it's just that was one of the benefits of this. I was understanding that he was really kind of all in, and there would be that opportunity for creativity
That's
with him. And so,
that's really cool.
yeah, it's fun. It's really fun.
I was saying that in that process of collaboration with Tom, like the fact that he was there and a part of it, that had to be a little nerve wracking.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain
Yeah.
expectation around like how you deliver, and so
Yeah.
and operating in a brand new space. I mean, I guess expectation setting had to be through the roof.
Well, it was. And, yeah, I had a long career, but I had never made one of these commercially.
Sure.
Unless you go all the way back to Pearl. We made Texas Select near beer back then, which was a whole Frankenstein creation. And it's so long ago. I can't even really remember how it was made, except I do know that there was a vacuum distillation, um, which was terrible. It was overheated. There was oxidation, like premature. There were a
Oof.
variety of additional ingredients that went into this thing, including something that they would boil barley and make this dextrin solution, basically.
The basically maltodextrin. It's like
Yeah, but
tapioca.
and they would crack open the barley, they would boil it went like right in hot into the mash tun, and then run it off, kind of like really hot, and then run it off and boil that, and they would ferment it, they'd pitch it, and it made the stuff they called it PLG, that was it was just gross. It smelled terrible. It brought all the grainy terribleness that you would think about boiled barley, and then they
Sure.
fermented it, which had its nice sulfur component, and they would blend this back with the old with the distilled part, and then they would add a variety of different things, including some beer flavor. And so it was just vile. No,
Interesting.
it's terrible. And that's like, I mean, I made one 40 years ago, and then kind of moved into this very much not like that. And
Sure.
so,
Sure.
yeah, there was a lot of expectation. There was some trepidation from me because I'd never really waded into this truly commercially. And
Hmm.
so, and he didn't pull any punches. If he liked it, he liked it. If he didn't like it, he would tell me that this is terrible. And
That's great. I
I
mean,
would have to agree with him sometimes, you know?
that's the only way you make something better, right? You have to be able to have those like open, honest conversations about whether or not something is or is not too
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah.
Like,
And,
this is the package
yeah.
market is relentless.
Yeah. And that's what and again, I'm not making beer. We talked about this before. I can't, my job is not to make beer for me, right?
Right.
I'm the guy making the beer, but I have a specific audience. In this case, it was Tom, and now it's a much broader audience. But I, I make beer for people that want that I think people are going to want to drink.
Hmm.
And don't get me wrong, I like a nice complex beer sometimes. But I also have to keep in mind that I'm not just making it for me. I'm making it for others who may just want to drink a beer and enjoy it and get a little bit of the complexity, which might tease their brains a little bit more and take them to the next thing. So I have to keep that in mind. That's my job, is to make beer that people want to drink, not necessarily the things that I want to drink.
That's fair. That's fair perspective. I think that it's something that you should like, but at the end of the day, the consumer is going to tell you if it's good or not.
Exactly. That is exactly right. Yeah.
But yeah, so go on with Bureau. So what's the you guys just launched?
Yep.
How are things going?
Great. Very uh for me, from the beer side, I'm super happy. I think people are, it scares me every time, you take a beer out of the brewery and you put it in a package, you send it off into the world where people are going to mistreat it, or not, at least not treat it with respect. And you just don't know, once it leaves, your radius of your vision, how it's going to be treated and how people are going to like it. But I would say the response has been great, really good. I keep waiting to figure out which one is going to take the lead. I can't tell yet. All are sort of equally have champions, which is nice. It'd be nice to have a flagship. I'm not sure which way this is going to go.
Oh no,
Um,
man. Having too much success is always a good problem to have.
right, right. And I cannot stress enough the team that the CEO John Herman has put together to run this thing. Just A-class people, really smart, really strong, super motivated. Just the creative design behind the branding, the name. We ran through a couple of different names and came back to Bureau. The way the can is designed, the colors, the marketing, the frankly the social media reach and the publicity that all the teams have put together, for Tom to just sort of carry the flag through. They've done a
Sure.
fantastic job. I cannot stress how much they are responsible for the success of this. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. There's a lot of great brewers out there. There's a lot of great beers. And unfortunately, some of them never get the light of day because for whatever reason, they just can't get them in front of people, or people don't notice them, and they just sort of stay in their corner of the world and never get out. We have the fortunate, um, yeah, just the fortunate existence of this team that we put together that is the best at what they do, and they knocked it out of the park with the launch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been seeing all the social media posts and all the videos, and it seems like you've really done it right. And the branding is beautiful. It really stands out on a shelf, especially the cases. They look like a billboard.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
yep,
I
they
think
did
it's really,
fantastic.
really well done.
Thanks.
So, but um, yeah, I mean, I guess we can tie a knot on it there.
Yeah,
But thank you for the conversation. Grant will be back on the next episode of this show as the host, having a conversation with a brewer of his choosing. That will be in 2 weeks, so make sure you tune in for that. As a reminder, visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media. To support journalism and beers in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Christopher O'Connor, and thank you for listening to the Brewer to Brewer podcast. Thank you, Grant.
thanks, Chris. Great talking to you.
You too.
First Tea is your source for ginger and a whole host of teas for brewing. Find your winter flavors and aromas to spice up the holiday season by talking with the team at First Tea. Email them at info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more.
Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney from Launchpad Brewing in Aurora, Colorado. And the main reason for our relationship with Malteurop, besides the consistency of their product, is working with Dustin Kraft, our local Malteurop craft sales manager. Dustin has some extensive brewing experience from previous jobs and is excited about the products that they offer and are developing. We have 2 separate brew houses at Launchpad, a 5-barrel pilot system and a 20-barrel brew house, which allows us to test some of the experimental malt products occasionally, which really keeps the creativity flowing in the brew house. In addition, we have had great experiences with their customer success team. Try our GABF gold medal winning beer, silver medal worthy, an American Belgian style ale made with 100% Malteurop malt. Contact Malteurop today and visit malteuropmaltingco.com.
Today's episode was also sponsored by our friends at Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.